Hi, I am Jeffrey Warnick, and welcome to another pod shoot. I am so happy to have with me as my guests Glen Weyl and Audrey Tang. The topic today we will be discussing is really a concept, that uh, is pro-social media as opposed to anti-social media. When these platforms first developed, they were called social media platforms. I personally, even though I have sponsored several free speech platforms, I still have personally always referred to them as anti-social media platforms because I don't think there's very thing much pro-social, about them. They're mostly filled with ad hominem attacks of other people. Uh, you know, um, and if this is our definition of social, conversation meant to educate us, enrich us, inform us. I don't think it's achieving those objectives. I mean, I think there have been a lot of studies that have shown that social media, and I don't even like to call it social media. I think the best definition that I always thought of how you describe these platforms was Ed Snowden, when Ed Snowden described these platforms as surveillance platforms masquerading as social media. So my money has never gone into a platform that does any surveillance. And nor have I ever given money to a platform that does any sort of content moderation. So I'm anti-content moderation and I'm anti-surveillance. So to some extent, it could be said that maybe I am trying to support, a platform that's pro-social.
Mhm.
But then the question is how you can support a platform that's pro-social, that can actually also encourage, you know, uh, good civic participation, so the dialogue and conversation enriches societies, rather than, people who just like to complain about things, and doing it by attacking other people rather than presenting ideas on how to make the world a better place. So, one thing is destructive communication and the other is constructive communication. We either want to destroy, or we want to build. Sometimes you need to destroy to rebuild, but for many people, from what I, read of the content, they're into the destruction phase, but they have no idea regarding the reconstruction phase. So they want to demolish, but they make no effort to rebuilding once they demolish. So I got very interested in getting exposed to Audrey and Glenn's work, and so we're here to discuss it, and to see how BitChute could participate, in being a pro-social platform. So, Glenn, Audrey, I'd like to turn it over to you, and maybe you can tell a little bit about yourselves, how you got involved in this project, how you define antisocial and pro-social, and how you've thought about this problem, and how you think BitChute can cooperate with you in building a more robust ecosystem, that would promote pro-social dialogues and conversation.
Roger. Yeah, I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. What we have witnessed around 2014-15 was that there was a sea change then. Before 2014, many of those social networks, when it's trending for everyone. When it tries to optimize, that's to say maximize something, it tried to maximize people-to-people connections and so on. But in 2015, along came like autoplay. along came the advertisement engine that let people, bid for the highest bidder that commands the attention on an individual basis. And so fast forward to today, exactly as you observed, Jeff, it is now much easier for antisocial content to spread because it's amplified by an algorithm that detects how addictive it is, such content. And the more
Audrey, when I was involved in the previous experience, when I was actively involved with Parler, and I used to write about this topic, I used to call it engagement, through enragement. That basically these platforms learned that people will engage more when they're enraged more. So they were actually intentionally provoking age to increase engagement, because the increase in engagement produced dollars to them. So actually provoking enragement became profitable. I don't know how anybody could think provoking enragement is pro-social. That seems to be anti-social.
Yeah, and I think that, there's this toxic dynamic where the basic dynamics and business model and structure of the platform fuel that enragement for engagement. And then you come in and are like, well, I don't like the worst of that, so let me censor it, instead of actually building a structure that inherently supports, pro-social participation.
Yes, and our experience in Taiwan, so I was the digital minister since 2016, is that it is possible to build a platform. Instead of censoring any voice, we just make the uncommon ground, the rare but nevertheless true agreements that people find to be resonating across people's different ideas, different camps, and so on. So the ideas that actually prompts both sides of an aisle to think, oh, actually, there may be something to that. If we change the algorithm transparently to promote those uncommon ground, then it has two effects. First, it doesn't need censorship anymore, because the more extreme voices and statement, they're still there. You can link to it and so on, but it does not command the same engagement through enragement as the old antisocial algorithm. And the second is that it is actually very beneficial for communities, for churches, for city governments, and so on, to sponsor this kind of connecting content that makes it easier for the sub-constituencies to start talking to one another. So there may be a business model there, and this is the intuition for the paper.
Yeah, from my understanding, and while I'm an investor in BitChute, and I have a non-trivial amount in my investment in BitChute. There's a lot of details of how BitChute works I don't even know, but so I'm going to say some things that are my understanding, and my understandings might not be completely accurate. So in BitChute, I understand that people are encouraged or supposed to label their own content, by basically like a rating, like a movie rating on. And so to give some guidance to people when they're looking, what kind of content they're looking at, and also the topic. So if people want to search for a specific topic, they can search by topic, because people have labeled their video by the topic. I think that's the only way people can label, and people self-label. So BitChute doesn't put any labels on. People, from my understanding, self-label. And so I think in the landing page, I think you can follow like what's popular, what's trending. Those are all pretty conventional algorithms. And again, that's just a representation of the decision made by the community. Since there is no content moderation, since there is no amplification of anyone's content, that's just summarizing the behavior of people on the platform. What's popular is defined by what the people are looking at. What's trending is defining what people are looking at, at this point, at a point in time, and then people can then search for the topics they're interested in, and then look at the videos that are that popular, trending, or whatever, on those topics. But there are no other algorithms other than calculations done that describe people's own choices on the platform.
Mhm, mhm.
So there's no choices that are made by the platform on behalf of anyone. So
Yes, and that's very transparent, right? It is not tailor-made to each individual. It is
correct,
rather for entire communities. They're seeing the same statistics.
correct,
And the basic idea of ours is the same, except that you decompose the overall BitChute community into sub-communities that are communities of interest, like Republicans or people in a particular church, or et cetera. And then that you offer to people the ability to see statistics like you're describing for those communities. But rather than just popularity, we give a sense of what's bringing people together within that community. So like, what is something that overall is consensual? Because sometimes the thing that's popular, like, is just the thing that certain people are angry about. Whereas the things that bring people together across their divides are things that that community can agree on.
yes, I like that. It's some people just watch stuff because it's a way for them to feel that they can vent the rage at a world they feel impotent to have any impact on. So what makes them feel better is having somebody express the anger they feel, and therefore it's sort of like a vicarious experience. So and it might make people feel better for the moment, to just yell and scream and, get it off their chest, as they say, but after you do that, the problem's still there. So,
Yeah. And we think it's great, if those communities want to exist and express that anger. You just need to understand that it's a narrow community. It's not like everybody is into that. And one thing that the popularity score can be misleading about is that something can be popular because there's a narrow community, they're all angry about it, or it can be popular because like 10% uniformly spread over the whole population is watching it. And you kind of want to know the difference between those things, because if there's 10% of the population that are like, KKK, and every single one of them are watching that, versus 10% randomly from all the population is doing it, like, those are very different populations, and you get very misled about what's going on just by a simple popularity score. And so what we're trying to do is have these statistics, which can come from this work that Audrey did in Taiwan, that give people a sense of what communities is this, meaningful for, so that people can sort of know who they're experiencing things with. And you get a sense of that in person. Like when you go to a concert, you see who the other people there are at that concert. When you go to a political rally, you get a sense for that. But online, detaches you from that a lot. And so this is trying to give a little bit of that context back.
yeah, I think that, I don't know how easy this is to accomplish, in a platform that's a video streaming platform as opposed to a microblogging platform. In microblogging platform, people are writing something, and then people can issue comments to what they're writing, and then people can broadly share those comments and engage in them. I think in video streaming platforms, one is, I don't even know in microblogging platforms, because I don't really participate, on really how many people who produce content then actually engage with the people who are commenting on that content. I don't know if they're, reading their comments, if they're engaging with those comments, or they only care about what they have to say and don't really care about what other people have to say about, as long as their followers are growing. So, and then
Yeah.
they can.
So I would divide, there's like broadly three categories of platform that we think about. One is sort of productivity platforms like LinkedIn and GitHub, where there's a bunch of explicit information in there about what organizations you're a part of, and verified credentials, and it's very clear what the groups are. Then there's more the microblogging style platforms, news oriented platforms, where you know it's there's a lot of likes and comments and explicit reactions, to things, but usually not like explicit affiliations with organizations of different kinds. And then finally, there's platforms, like YouTube and TikTok, Instagram, where a lot of it is much more implicit reactions. It's like, what are you looking at? What is your affect when you look at that, if it can track that, et cetera. And there are different algorithms that can accomplish the goals that we're talking about in those different contexts. Like in the productivity context, you just use the explicit organizations that people are part of. So it's much more direct. In something like TikTok, what they're using is the attention that you're putting on things, the sequence of videos that you're doing, the way you scroll through them, et cetera. But in all of these contexts, I think there are ways to like get at some of the same signals, but using different algorithmic approaches.
YouTube already implements a version of this, not for the video, but rather for the comments. So if somebody feel that a video is not telling the whole story, they can leave some comments. Previously, the YouTube comments are just sorted by the number of likes they get or the date. But now YouTube is experimenting with what's called community nodes, which means that instead of the comments with the most votes floating to the top, it is the comments with the votes across different age brackets, different ideological camps, different sub-communities. So if a comment that offers value across different communities, instead of fighting between communities, instead of the divisive one, if it's pro-social across communities, then it floats to the top in the YouTube community nodes comment stream. And so that is like one specific aspect within a video platform that they have now implemented this.
I think for BitChute, and my frame of reference is basically, my own podcast, because I read the comments on my podcast. I read them not because I really care what other people think, because I don't. But given the fact that I want to promote pro-social interaction, if I see a comment that's actually on topic, doesn't matter whether the people, agree with what I say or think I'm an idiot, as long as I think the content is constructive in nature and it's on topic, I will respond. So I'm just trying to provoke pro-social engagement on my own. On my own.
Audrey has a practice that she calls troll hugging, where no matter how negative of a comment or how sort of aggressive of a comment it is, she tries to find the kernel of relevance and truth in it.
I mean, if it's just a scam, then there's nothing constructive in it. But if it is something like a cathartic, venting out, then I find out the few words within it that can be construed as constructive and engage with just those words, basically ignoring the other parts. And I think having a kind of assistant to sort out automatically what people find as constructive can save both of us time, so that we can focus our energy on replying to the constructive part while knowing that the destructive part are still there. They're not censored. It's just not floating to the top.
Yeah, I don't know. I think our comments are time-stamped. So I don't know if there's any attempt to algorithmically manipulate. I don't even think we have the capacity in BitChute to do that, because it's not the ethos of BitChute. The ethos of BitChute is,
of course.
We're
not trying to algorithmically, tailor-made so that each person sees a different comment stream. This is not what we are after. We're just to assign some like community labels to it, so it's more transparency, more speech, and everybody sees the same statistics. It is not about algorithmically, creating rabbit holes for each and every.
Yeah, and we're delighted to talk to your team, because we're trying to work on an open source project, likely in collaboration with Blue Sky, to provide a code base to do this that isn't specific to a platform. And perhaps it could be relevant to you as well.
Yeah, I will make that introduction so that you can speak directly with the team. For me, I assume and again, I'm an amateur when it comes to all this. I mean, I don't, while I back these platforms, I'm backing free speech. So, and speech right now, the public square has moved from the physical domain to the virtual domain. And,
Jeff, you may be an amateur in the algorithmic side, but I think you're one of the most experienced pros in terms of living the principles, and that's the reason why we enjoy talking to you. So
yeah, and you've been working with like internal prediction markets and having staff and so on to do upvotes and downvotes and so on for decision making for decades. So we're happy to also learn from your experience.
Oh, thank you so much. But so when I see, sometimes when I read the comments, I'm clicking on the person who's making the comments. And a lot of people who are making comments have not posted any videos and have no followers. So, my assumption is if they have not posted any content and have 0 followers, that they're basically trollers. So, but some of the trollers are actually making comments that, in my opinion, deserve me to interact with, and some are not, and I don't. So, but Audrey, I try and do what you said you do, is I try and look for a reason to justify not me avoiding the person, but engaging in that person. So I'm constantly looking for some kernel inside their comment that I say, okay, this is actually constructive, and I'm going to interact with that person.
Well, and Jeff, I think that's very much the spirit of so many of the things that you do, because you're obviously someone who has a very strong set of beliefs and views. And, not just in spite of that, partly because of that, you also are someone who engages with people with very radically different views, not just engages with them, but often helps support them when they get victimized by other people. And I think that's, a very important principle to me. My family fled the Holocaust, but and there was something in Nazi Germany called the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler took out a lot of high-ranking Nazis, and even if one doesn't like those folks that he took out, they were pretty ugly in a bunch of ways. I think you always support those who are standing against the consolidation of power by authoritarian forces, even if you don't agree with them. And I think you're someone who's done that more consistently than just about anyone I know. So,
well, thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much for those really kind words. But I think that's probably the most important mission in my life. Is to stand up against authority, because any authority is a repression of our personal liberty, and so that anyone who interferes with our own expression of our own personal liberties and freedoms is going back to the words, antisocial behavior. It's not pro-social behavior. So pro-social behavior is behavior that facilitates people engaging in constructive dialogue with an attempt to reach a consensus. They might fail at doing so, but at least there's a good faith effort to make it. And the good faith effort is not about me talking and you listening. It's about, us each talking and actually each listening, because the goal of the conversation should not be to convince anyone that we're right or wrong. It should be so that we can better understand each other. And that to me is the main purpose, I think, from my point of communication, is so people can make themselves understood, and in the same process, understand somebody else better. I used to, when I was raised, when my daughter was a child, and I would raise her, and she would talk, and she says, she talk about, like, you got to understand me, and I would tell her, I'm going to give you a life lesson. Life lesson is, if you want to be understood, first try and understand. So, that's why, like, even when I do, business negotiations, I tend to listen before I talk for a while, because I'm trying to understand what that other person needs. Once I understand what somebody needs, I can figure out whether I could give it to them or whether I can't give it to them. And then then we don't have to waste each other's time. But I'm listening to figure out, okay, this is what this person needs, and what can I give up so that they feel happy with what they get, where I feel I'm also satisfied with what I'm getting in return.
A term that Audrey and I use a lot is broad listening. So, there's in the 20th century, we had broadcast. You could send one message to many, many people. And a lot of the tools that we're talking about here in terms of pro-social media are about how are we able to easily and within our attention span, understand broadly how other people are thinking about things.
Yes. And I think that's the only way we have an opportunity of even getting an effort to basically create a consensus is through dialogue, which means we have to be a good listener. So there will not be a successful conversation if two people, or whoever's participating in the conversation are not good listeners. So either people like listening to themselves speak, or people want to understand somebody else, and through understanding somebody else, the conversation is not about what I wanted, how do I get what I want, but how do you make as many people as happy as possible, where at the end of the day, everybody feels they didn't get everything they wanted, but what they got was better than getting nothing, because they just insisted on having it all or nothing, and they're just about corner solutions, that tend to, if you have enough corner solutions through enough period of time, the end product will always be the same. It'll be violence.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the tools that we're developing helps early on in a conversation to surface the common needs that both sides or all sides share. So, for example, in my initial conversation with Laura Loomer on her show, with a lot of people watching in live stream, very early on, we discovered that we have this common need to fight authoritarianism without taking away free speech. And so this is like a bridge that can then make our different arguments and so on kind of share the same bridge and then express under the lens of this bridge of not compromising on free speech while trying to promote prosociality. So I totally agree with you that listening across the conversations and toward consensus, that is important. And so the tool we're developing is essentially try to establish very early on that what could be the uncommon ground that people can then identify as, the differences can be portrayed in a fair way, but those differences are on the basis of those uncommon ground that we both share.
Now, Audrey, you have actual experience doing this. Why don't you share with people your experience in actually implementing, and encouraging this type of consensus building through pro-social dialogues?
I think a great way to start, even before we get into the technical tools, would be to tell the story of the Sunflower Movement, which is not known to most Americans, and a really fascinating story.
Yeah, definitely. So in 2014, the trust level in Taiwan was really low. The President Ma Ying-jeou at the time was enjoying an approval rate of 9%. So in a country of 24 million people, anything the president said, 20 million people are like, actually, we don't quite believe you, right? And so it becomes very difficult to achieve any societal scale conversation or consensus. And so at the time, there was a trade deal with Beijing that was being forced through in the parliament that would have opened our publishing industry, our telecommunication industry, to the much more authoritarian providers coming from Beijing. And so we kind of took the matters to our hands. We went to the parliament, we occupied it peacefully for 3 weeks, but we always made sure to say that we're not just protesters against something, we're demonstrators showing a different possibility. And that possibility is to invite 500,000 people on the street and many more online together in those broad listening exercises like citizens' assemblies and so on. Each group would talk about one aspect of the trade deal. And then every day we say, oh, this is the uncommon ground we managed to establish for the day, and then this is the remaining divisions that we need to work through the next day. And so after 3 weeks of such conversations, we managed to agree on a very coherent set of ideas that the Speaker of the Parliament, Wang Jinping, finally said, okay, the people have a point, and we will just implement that, go home. So it is one of the very rare Occupy movement that converged instead of diverged. And so, of course, we cannot resolve all societal conflicts with occupying the parliament. And so I was tasked at the end of 2014 to start platforms online to replicate this process. So instead of a trade deal, maybe we talk about when Uber came to Taiwan, how to ensure that they pair the drivers and passengers charging fairly and paying the drivers fairly. And again, if it's a very abstract conversation, it's very difficult to avoid antisocial polarization. But when we ask people, how do you feel? What's fair? What's your feeling around the arrangement and so on? Again, after 3 weeks online, when people upvote and downvote each other's feelings and ideas, you see clusters of people feeling differently, like supporting Uber, supporting taxi unions, supporting rural places, and so on. But then we also discovered the uncommon ground, the 9 statements that everybody across different groups managed to agree on. And then we made it a law, the taxi law. And so Uber is now a legal fleet in Taiwan, and the rural co-ops and so on are also winning because they can establish their own dispatch systems and so on. So this is just one very early example, but it shows that instead of focusing on the 1 or 2 things that drives people apart, we can focus on some lower hanging fruits that establish the ground for further conversation.
No, it's interesting what you just said, and I found it very powerful in the sense you used the word that I think is a very underword used. You asked people what they think is fair. In society, we're always asking people questions. Do you want this? Do you like this? Is this a good policy? That policy? We almost never ask anyone if they think something is fair. And since most individuals like to signal that they're fair people, if they're asked what they think is fair, they'll generally give a pretty decent answer on what's fair.
Exactly.
Very few people want to signal that they're unreasonable, unfair people. It's like, I think one issue that I've seen this on, because I've seen writings on it, is like if they ask, when they ask them, there's been some polls that have asked Americans, to be fair, what do you think should be the highest income tax bracket? And Americans answer, and from what I've seen of the polls, the highest income bracket that people should be taxed on, when Americans ask what would be fair that people pay income taxes on, that people think fairness is significantly below our current top bracket. So, so when you ask people, do you think the rich are paying enough taxes? Many people will say no. But when you ask the specific question, what do you think is a fair tax for a wealthy person to pay? They'll come up with a lower income tax than wealthy people are now paying as a marginal tax. So
yes,
it's interesting that 2 questions are basically similar questions framed differently. So one is very abstract, and the other is a person revealing something about themselves and how they perceive fairness. Is that if you ask people to be fair, most people will actually be fair, and they will be fair because they don't want to be perceived as being unfair. So we don't tend to poll people or ask people questions on what they think is fair.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, just switching that demand mentality. Like, what do you demand? To like, what would you like to supply as a fair policy? I think changes people's mindset from a more antisocial, I want my team to win, to a more pro-social. Like, if I'm the referee, I will judge this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think a more systematic example of that change in mentality that's been really powerful in Taiwan is that, in the United States, I think we've had a lot of concern about college students being very radical, sort of maybe even violent around their political positions. And I think one reason that has occurred is because people feel very disempowered. They feel they don't have an ability to affect policy. They're not even able to vote, by the time they get to college. And so they feel just totally left out. And so they are very extreme because they have no responsibility. I think when people have no responsibility, they actually can take very extreme positions. Once you have to take the responsibility, you bear the consequences. And in Taiwan, they have this system that's been very effective of citizen proposed consensus-oriented legislation. And I think dozens of pieces of legislation have been passed based on this, many of them proposed by students. So even though they're under age of 18, they cannot vote. They can build consensus for new laws. And in fact, once they're 18, like almost going to vote is a reduction in their civic engagement, because now they just do the easy thing of voting every 4 years or whatever. And before they were doing the hard thing of building the consensus to get a law passed. And so that means that by the age of 18, that generation is the most civically engaged, according to international evaluations, of any people of that generation in the world. And they are some of the least polarized because they had to work through the hard work of building consensus across society. And taking that responsibility is a great way to reduce that polarization.
Yeah, it's like the Pygmalion effect, right? For a 14, 15-year-old, if you treat them as an adult that must share the responsibility of thinking about where the society is going, they grow up quicker than if you treat them as a kind of 7-year-old baby.
Well, and even for 7-year-old, my daughters, we were having some discipline issues. The way that I addressed it is I said to them, look, we need some rules in this family because otherwise here's the things that are going to happen. You're not going to get to school on time. We're not going to get good sleep. Why don't you help us come up with the rules so that those things don't happen, because you don't want those things to happen either. And then they're much more willing to obey the rules if they helped design them,
As the expression goes, you can either make people part of the solution or part of the problem.
Yeah.
Typically, if you make people part of the solution, they're less likely to be part of the problem, because I think the point you've made is you've enfranchised them, not disenfranchised them. So people respond if they feel impotent about something that impacts their life, and impacts their life adversely, then they'd be prone to radicalization, and that's a natural response. And some previous talks, podcasts I've had, it's like when I sit back and I hear like mainstream media and other people talk about conspiracy theories, I say, why do you think people have conspiracy theories? Because there's no transparency, and without transparency, there's an erosion of trust. So when people people observe certain things and they seek an explanation, and the explanation they're given publicly makes no sense, they come up with alternative explanations.
Yeah.
So so if we had as Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. If we had a lot more transparency, and that's what like blockchains are trying to accomplish.
Yes.
Is there I call blockchains trust intermediaries, and blockchains replace the perception that third parties can be trusted, because right now the evidence is that third parties, have done a bad job, at creating trust. So we use this what's called trustless technologies like blockchain to intermediate trust, and if we intermediate trust better, then we'd have no need for conspiracy theories. We have need for conspiracy theories because there's tremendous information asymmetry, and the people who hold the information are giving explanations that just make no sense whatsoever. I also have made claim, going back to Glen, what you just mentioned about, enfranchising people, so they have skin in the game, and whatever outcome that occurs, they've participated in it. As you were talking about that, I said, I've said, consistent with, what people like Thomas Jefferson warned about. Thomas Jefferson said of one of the fatal flaws, he believed there were several fatal flaws of the Constitution, and Thomas Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention. He was an ambassador to France at the time, so he wasn't a direct participant. probably our greatest, genius of that era, he said a fatal flaw of the Constitution was that there should never be allowed constitutionally an intergenerational transfer of debt. That all debt incurred by the government had to be paid off by that generation. He has suggested, 16 to 19 years, that all debt had to be paid off, so we wouldn't be paying debt off. One of the sayings regarding, provoking the revolution was no taxation without representation. So when we have 36 plus $trillion of debt and 200 plus $1 trillion of unfunded liabilities, and that the current voters want to continue voting more benefits for themselves, more tax breaks for themselves, while they're creating more deficits. Ultimately, what they're saying is a consequence of these decisions is taxation without representation on a generation that can't vote because the bill's being passed down to them. So what if young people could begin to vote on anything budget related? It's basically an agreement to run a deficit today, is a statement of saying we're going to increase taxes to somebody in the future, or we're going to have them pay taxes on benefits somebody else received that they're not going to have, that they'll be paying off benefits somebody else got, rather than and having less benefits themselves. So either way, that's unfair. Either way, this is an intergenerational transfer of risk where the losers have no participation in the process. So, I would assume if I was a teenager again, and was somewhat aware of this stuff, which I think many people are, I'd be pretty outraged about look at the world I'm being left. I'm being left in a world where the government produces a report that says Social Security is broke, and 10 years from now it won't be able to pay anywhere near 100 cents on the dollar. And what's going to happen is, I'm going to suffer the benefit. People are going to take money out of my pocket to transfer wealth to people who are wealthier than me. So and what kind of government services am I going to get? When I'm an adult, and paying taxes, I won't get any services because I'll have all my tax dollars paying off all the promises of the past where the other people, are beneficiaries. There was a concept, by this guy, Sachs, called odious debt. So, an odious debt, so
Facts.
for me, these all meet, the definition of what should be described as odious debt, and the concept was debt that's odious in nature. A future generation would not be bound by paying off, odious debt. And we're creating a lot of odious debt today. And maybe if we really thought who we get consent from, shouldn't we get consent from people who are ultimately impacted by the decisions being made?
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm now also advising as a senior fellow to the Project Liberty Institute. And the Project Liberty's idea is precisely to use blockchains and other distributed systems to offer backup to like Blue Sky, but also any platform that offers like a fire hose, so that people can see first transparently that there's no conspiracy theory around moderation. Anything that is lawful, even though it may be awful, would not be mysteriously shadow banned or removed because there's blockchain records that proves it. And the other thing is that the Project Liberty is supporting the bid on TikTok, the People's Bid on TikTok, headed by O'Leary and McCord and many other people. Yeah, right. And so the idea is that if we can make sure that people on TikTok, many of them very young people, when they feel enraged about this kind of injustice that you just described, we can then turn the platform around and ask, so how do you think is more fair? It can then turn into a pro-social platform where we can actually get working ideas from not just the young people, but including the young people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love when you, as soon as you said the word fair, that really triggered something in me. It's something I think as a person, I always try and be very, very fair in my interactions, with people.
Audrey's slogan in the Ministry of Digital Affairs in Taiwan was "Fast, Fun, and Fair."
Yes.
Well, why don't you tell people more about the success that you had, and how and how this how this evolved during the COVID period, and what you were actively involved into make the response to COVID something that society became actively involved in and cooperative and built consensus about.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things we had early on is to diffuse the polarization that people feel about the pandemic measures. So we've never had any citywide lockdown throughout the 3 years, but our TSMC and other shops manufacturing chips and so on just kept running without stopping for the 3 years. But we managed to, for the first couple of years, to stop the virus at our borders. And that depends on people, for example, washing their hands quite a lot. And I think that is partly because we had turned what could be polarizing issues in other places into bridge-making issues, pro-social issues in Taiwan. I'll use one example. Early on in 2020 in Taiwan, there's, of course, a group of people that feels wearing mask doesn't really help. It is about ventilation, aerosol, and so on. And they feel that wearing a mask actually hurts, and wearing the N95, the highest grade mask, hurts most. So that's one group of people. Another group of people, because of our experience with SARS a few years ago, people feel only the highest grade masks are useful and everything else is not useful. So if we do nothing, these two groups of people tend to fight each other, polarizing the mask issue. And so using this idea of uncommon ground, we very quickly found a innovative idea. And then we push out this meme, this cute picture of a Shiba Inu, a cute dog, putting her paw to her mouth, saying, if you wear a mask, it is to remind each other to wash your hands, to keep your dirty hand from your face. So it doesn't say about whether wearing a mask is useful or not. It just says if you see somebody wear a mask, it's just to remind you to wash your hands. And so it diffuses the situation. What could have been a very polarized fight, because we do measure the tap water usage, become just a all of society endeavor to wash their hands. And so that sort of finding the uncommon ground also indicates what is fair. And so people then don't feel that the state is pushing one conspiracy theory or the other, but naturally people become much more reasonable when it comes to tolerating the mask use of each other. We eventually did the same for many other counter-pandemic issues as well, but this stood out because it diffused one of the early flashpoints.
And the Shiba Inu is also the symbol of Doge, right?
Yes.
So that's the OG Doge.
Yeah, we're like the OG Doge.
So it shows that when people, if you allow people to reach a consensus and stay out of their way, most times people will come up with better solutions than a central authority will come.
Exactly. Yes.
And that's the work.
People.
Glenn, having some training in economics, might know better, but maybe both of you know the work of Eleanor Ostrom.
Absolutely.
And
Great inspiration to us. Yeah.
And that's a lot of Eleanor Ostrom's work, that if you leave people alone of a community alone to solve problems, on average, they'll do a better job than an authoritarian figure will do, at solving problems. In Mexico, when they did land reforms, in many of the areas to avoid social conflict, they created what's called these ejidos.
Ejidos, yeah.
Yes. And so the people in these ejidos are ejidatarios.
Yeah.
So if you go,
You spent a lot of time in Mexico, right, Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I've gone to, one of the places when you go to like Acapulco or something, there's a place that you stop, or some places where there's land owned by these ejidatarios, and they have places for amusement and stands to eat food, and basically how they divvy things up, they decide amongst themselves, and when you go to these ejidatarios, you'll find them better managed, than any government organization. They're peaceful. People create their own consensus, and and people trust going to these ejidatarios, and they figured out how to allocate resources, in a Kosian way, that type of examples that Ostrom says, given the tools and the abilities to come up with how we should organize ourselves, then in self-organizing, we do a good job at self-organizing. If there's no real controlling authority, and to the extent that if somebody gets influence in the group, they get influence in the group because people have ceded that influence to the group on a voluntary basis. So I used to, when I gave talks, I would give a different type of example. The example that I've given is like, I used to, growing up on Long Island in New York, I used to play a lot of basketball. And so I would go to parks and play in the playgrounds and play basketball. And then sometimes I'd get in conversations with, my friends, and I'd say to them, be honest, we play basketball, we're on the school basketball team, and we play in the park, okay? Where do you have more fun, on the school basketball team or in the park? At the end, everyone has more fun at the park, okay? I said, really, if you take a look at how we play, okay, we play, how the playground rules work is, if you win, you stay on the court, and the losing team leaves the court, and you are on the court as long as you keep winning. So there's a strong incentive to want to win, because you don't want to be waiting, to be on the court, lose, get to the end of the line, and wait to play again. No, you're there to keep playing. So you want to win. So since you want to win, and you want to play with other people who want to win, so it's kind of like self-organizing. People choose their teams. Okay, it's my turn. I'm next. So I get to see all the people who are not playing, and I say, okay, how can I construct a winning team, on a voluntary basis, since I get to choose, and there is no coach. People go out there and play, and most people will play to their strengths or weaknesses. If somebody's a hack, and fouling other people all the time, nobody wants to play with them. So that's antisocial behavior. If somebody calls a foul all the time and is picky calling fouls, also people don't want to play with them either. So if someone can't shoot and chucks, nobody wants to play with them either. So basically, you have to basically play to your strength, because if you don't play to your strength, you don't get to play, because nobody will want to play with you. So, but there's no controlling authority throwing you out. It's just people want to win, and people want to choose the combination of people that want to win. And if you want to be on a team that stays on the court, you kind of got to understand, you got to play to your strength, and acknowledge other people's strength. So you end up playing together as a team, even though there's no coach telling you, pass the ball, run this play, or this stuff that you're just doing it anyway. I found, I found that ultimately, when I was playing with friends on the court, we were more honest about what each other's strengths and weaknesses were than our coach was. Our coach had set strategy. Our coach liked certain people and didn't like other people, would call more plays for another person. We just wanted to stay out in the court, and we just wanted to win, and so you had a whole bunch of people, and all this is done, organically. Then the question is, do you even need a referee?
Well, the real question to me is, how do you scale that? So there's a great Japanese thinker, Karatani Kojin, and I was just reading the translation. There's both the translation of our book to Japanese, but there's also someone who wrote sort of a shorter version of our, going on the ideas of our book, and it talks a lot about Karatani Kojin's work, and he discusses very much the idea that there's those types of sort of informal self-management, but they're hard to scale. And so then you get sort of bureaucratic control, like, ancient Egypt, the initial kingdoms and so forth, and then you get the market. But the question is, can you bring back those informal forms of organization, but at larger scale using technology? And I think that's really kind of the project that we're engaged in, is how do you harness technology and networks to bring back the genius of that local self-organization, but allow it to apply at a more, diverse and global scale.
Well, I can tell you in my business how I tried to scale that. Okay, in my business, I tried to run a business without there being any authority figures, because I don't really like to boss people. So I like to converse with people. I like to engage with people, but I don't like I don't like anyone telling me what to do. So given the fact that I don't like anyone telling me what to do, I should not also be in the business of telling anyone else what to do, because then I'm a hypocrite. So so when it came to, when I was young, building my first business, not really, knowing how to do it, but knowing, something about myself, and my own strengths and weaknesses, I decided, like, how do I do everything through incentives? So, like, how did I scale cooperation? Okay, I scaled cooperation. The only thing I could come up with how to scale cooperation was, I basically gave a very large percentage of the company's profits I distributed to the employees. But to distribute the employees, they determined how to distribute amongst themselves. I did not participate in the process. If one person held out, one person could block everyone else, okay, if they held out. So basically, they had to negotiate amongst themselves and get everybody else's consensus. Now, if they didn't build consent over a certain period of time, they had a certain period of time to come up with an allocation scheme that everybody unanimously agreed to. If they couldn't reach unanimous agreement in the time frame that was allotted to them to accomplish that, then I was brought in as a mediator. I basically got to impose a solution. Okay, but the cost of failure meant that I got half the bonus pool. So if they failed in their negotiation, half the bonus pool
your
went to me.
price is
having the
50%.
price.
Okay.
So never did it get to the point where it got to having to come to me, because then people knew the pie was much smaller. So everybody had to figure out how to cooperate with each other so that everybody kind of felt that they were treated fairly, amongst how they decided to allocate the bonus pool. And I also discovered that created cooperation amongst people, because if the people you're working with are going to help define what bonus, and nobody likes you, and you're not cooperative, and you build a reputation for not being cooperative, then in the meeting, people are going to sit back and say, I'm not good. And then nobody's appealing to me. Okay, what the last thing I wanted was the people come and tell me how wonderful they were, or complain about somebody else. I was removed from the equation, because whatever I thought people were wonderful or not, was irrelevant to them. Once people were hired, they would only be fired by their peers. I had no right to fire people. Okay, only people be fired by a supermajority of their peers wanting them to go.
Well, I think it's a perfect spirit on which to end it, because that's very much the spirit in which we wrote our book. Our book has a more formalized version of that, but exactly, it's co-managed by all the people who are contributors to the book, rather than top down by us. And
why don't you talk about your book, Glenn?
What?
Why don't you talk about your book?
Oh, sure, yeah. So our book is called Plurality. It's at plurality.net. You can also get it on Amazon, but it's, to our knowledge, the first fully open source and democratically governed book. So while we started with some of the initial power, as people contributed, that got given away, and now people can vote on which contributions are added to the book, and anyone can contribute. We've had dozens and dozens of people from all around the world contribute to the book, and it kind of describes a lot of these ideas that we've been talking about, how they played out in Taiwan, how they're developing elsewhere. And it's inspired many things, including some really basic changes to how Japanese politics is working, a lot of changes on these different platforms. And I hope it can inspire us to work with you all at BitChute and find a way to make this relevant for your platform.
How has it impacted Japanese? You said in
You wanna
Japanese
tell the story,
politics?
Audrey?
Yeah, sure. So there's many platforms that came from the ideas described in the book. For example, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, as we speak, there is this experiment called "What Could Bowling Green Be?" That uses the same prosocial algorithm that I just described with the Uber case in Taiwan, but for the Kentucky context. And in Japan, the governor, Koike-san, is on her third term. But when she ran for the third term election, she had an unexpected challenger, a 33-year-old machine learning expert,
Science fiction writer.
science fiction writer, entrepreneur, who never participated in politics and just read our book and decided to run for governor 1 month before the election day. And so the way Takahiro Ano, run is exactly as you described, Jeff. It's he doesn't have a fixed platform. He just asked all the citizens of Tokyo to come up with any platform that they feel like, and then they designed an algorithm so that only the ideas that convince a broad swath of Tokyo citizens end up becoming his platform. So he crowdsourced his platform. And so before the election day, independently ranked, his platform was the best scored platform, better even than Koike, the incumbent at second place. Of course, he didn't win, but he got the most votes anybody under 40 ever did, and then now becomes advisor to GovTech Tokyo, advisor to Koike, so that the governor can then use this idea to make Tokyo better. A similar platform is now also being launched last week called Engaged California by Governor Newsom to crowdsource ideas on how to recover from the wildfire better for Eaton and Palisade, and hopefully soon many other topics as well. So it's a movement of broad listening that's been really catching on.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. I don't know how time constrained you are, but I'm looking.
Sure.
It sounds to me that as I'm listening to you speak, that this is a much better way of like implementing what Dogi is attempting to accomplish. So, it seems to me that, many Americans, obviously Musk is a very controversial figure, and the way Dogi is operating is very controversial, but many people who don't like Musk, and don't think the way Dogi is running is the right way to run Dogi, share the view that they want government to be significantly more efficient. Wouldn't be the framework that you've designed be a much more efficient way?
Jeff, as I was saying earlier, I think in some ways what Audrey did was the OG Doge.
Yes.
But one doesn't have to take a position on what one thinks of the current efforts to say that Taiwan is a case that we know works, that has a proven track record. Taiwan has had the strongest economy in the developed world over the last decade. It is the smallest government anywhere in the world. So if you actually want to have a small, efficient government, Taiwan is the example. It is, I think, 11% of GDP is government expenditures. And, that's like several times smaller than any other developed country. It has the highest median income at purchasing power parity of any country with more than 10 million people in the world. I could go on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So we know that that's an example that works, and we know that there are clear lessons from that case.
And also top in Asia in terms of freedom on the internet and free speech, which is very important to our culture. But I agree. I mean, in 2016, when I first became digital minister, we asked everyone, like, what kind of government service would you like to make more efficient? And in 2017, one of the best ideas coming from people is that people are fed up with filing their tax in 3 hours. They want to reduce that to 3 minutes, and it could be done. We just invited everyone who want to improve on this direct filing experience and kind of ask them, what do you feel is fair? What do you feel is a better journey to filing your tax? And just by pulling together people's ideas, in a couple years, we shrunk the tax filing experience from 3 hours to half an hour to 10 minutes, and now finally to 3 minutes on average.
Wow. Wow. Congratulations on that. What have you been attempting to do in the U.S. with respect to this framework? I mean, you've mentioned California.
Yes.
What else are you attempting to do in the
California, Kentucky?
There's a major effort in the state of Massachusetts right now. Actually, I haven't talked to Audrey about this, but we're hopefully going to attempt to do quite a major transformation in the state of Massachusetts, where I live, as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And there's already the culture of citizen assembly, say in Oregon. And so I'm also involved in advising efforts, again, to scale up and scale more deeply such citizen assemblies.
And in the state of Colorado, some of these tools were used to help allocate the budget in the state. So it's really been used in many places. And then, of course, as we mentioned, the X Community Notes algorithm, the YouTube Community Notes, maybe soon Meta, which is implementing it. So in many different aspects of the technology area, the government area, these ideas are starting to be developed. The U.S. is not always the most flexible government system. Speaking to your Thomas Jefferson, if you go to the Jefferson Memorial, it says that, the constitutions probably need to change every 15 or 20 years, just like the decks do. And somehow that's not exactly the way it's worked out in practice in the U.S. A younger democracy like Taiwan maybe has a little bit more flexibility, but hopefully things like Doge can inspire us to think anew about what's possible here, and with the help of people like you, Jeff. So really looking forward to collaborating with you on all that. So
I think I always like to end these podcasts with giving my guests the opportunity of, because I unfortunately I interrupt a lot. Hopefully some of my interruptions are worthwhile.
No, it's a great.
Probably not all of them, but but I like anything that I haven't given you the opportunity to talk about, or any question that I should have asked that didn't ask.
One thing I will just mention is that we have a film coming out. I believe it is on Sunday, called Good Enough Ancestor. It's the story of all the work that Audrey did in Taiwan and of her life. There's a trailer already available online. You can easily find it by searching for Good Enough Ancestor. But the full film will be out on Sunday. And I hope many people will enjoy that and enjoy the book, which is, again, available free. All this is available free. And hope many of you will be part of making this better, more hopeful, social fabric possible.
So there's a website, what was again?
If you go to plurality.net, you'll find links to everything.
Okay, plurality.net, you'll find it, and it'll be available on Sunday.
Exactly.
And it can be live streamed. It can be watched by anyone
for free.
Yes, and the material that goes into making the film, almost 1 terabyte of footage, we're also making free in the public domain. So it's not just this one particular film of 20 minutes. If people want to make like 2-hour movies or manga or young adult fiction, or really, and these are not hypothetical, many of them are in the works. Also feel free to just access the raw material, the source code.
Oh wow, that's great. I commit to helping to circulate your website and this video that you have that will be released on Sunday. So hopefully we can help.
That's great, Jeff. We would love that. Yeah,
we'd love to play that on BShoot as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. This was
live
really
long and prosper, Jeff.
Thank you so much.
Take good care. Live long and prosper.
Bye.
Bye.